I'm Jason Rojas. I won a medal at the Olympics, but my toughest battle was in the bedroom. Ask me anything. UPDATE 6:20 p.m. Wednesday. Reddit. I need to sign off for the night, but thank you again for an awesome day of questions. UPDATE 4:30 p.m. Wednesday. Ahoy, I'm back. UPDATE 4 p.m. Wednesday. Need to take a quick break. Back shortly. UPDATE 2:20 p.m. Wednesday. I'm back. Let us get this party restarted. UPDATE 12:15 p.m. Wednesday. Thanks all for more great questions. I need to step away for a bit, but I'll be back this afternoon at 2 p.m. to dive back in. UPDATE 9 a.m. Wednesday. Wow, this is amazing. Thank you for the support and the questions. I'm jumping back in the ring. Ask away. UPDATE 11:22 p.m. Tuesday. Thanks all for the fantastic questions. I'm only sorry that I wasn't able to get to all of them. My brain is now turned to a plessauce, so I need to call IT night. Victory hand. In 2008, I did a cool thing. Along with 3 teammates, I won a silver medal in fencing at the Beijing Olympic Games. When I began writing a memoir about those years, I always had a sense that I should focus on my struggle to deal with the immense pressure of Olympics. I crashed and burned at my first games in Athens before Beijing. However, as I dug beneath the events of my life during the creative process, I realized that I could not ignore a secret that, until recently, I have hidden from nearly everyone around me. Since I was a teen, I have struggled with sexual performance anxiety. It constantly affected my confidence as an athlete, and it is impossible to ignore that my relentless pursuit to become an Olympian was, in some part, motivated by my fears that I was not enough of a man. Now, I feel compelled to share my story, not for its own sake, but because I have long seen a trend in sport and culture that I think needs to change. Many men still run outdated mental software that leads them to equate masculinity with winning, materialism, and sexual prowess. And with so many young boys sketching out the map for who they will become as they observe the men around them, I think it's high time we think about what they are learning. You can read more about my story in my recent article for Men's Health or get updates on my forthcoming book at web www.jasonrojas.coig, @jasonrojasusa.tw, @jasonrojasusa.fb, @jasonrojascoproof, https://i.red.it/lpd5799hjfv21.jpg.
Alex1me says, when did you or those around you realize you had Olympic level talent?
Jason Rojasusa replies, thanks for your cue. From about age 15, I started traveling to international under-17 and under-20 competitions and doing quite well. I had the Olympic dream in my mind, but it was still a distant possibility. It wasn't until I made the US national fencing team at age 18. This is relatively early for fencers, and decided to ship off to train in Ohio with a top Russian coach that I really thought I could make the team.
Sebask says, what do you think is the worst part of this mental software you mentioned? In terms of individual well-being. By the way, congratulations for this process of telling your story. It is not just your case, for sure.
Jason Rojasusa replies, thank you. I think many men learn, through culture and from other men, that they must think and behave a certain way to be respected as a man. But many of those expectations are wrong-headed or, at the very least, taken to encompass all scenarios when they really should be restricted to certain domains. I think it's these expectations trap men into the man box, the belief that anger is the only emotion they are allowed to express. When you don't talk about stuff, it boils up, the expectations grow more extreme, and you see more destructive behavior, and the cycle goes on.
Mike Edo says, what is most important for the partners of men who might be struggling in these ways? What can they do to be supportive? Would that answer be different for casual hookup versus relationship?
Jason Rojasusa replies, I would say that the number one thing is patience. Many men get it in their heads that they need to be Spartans in the bedroom, and when they begin telling themselves the story that they are failing, it becomes very difficult to reach them. This happened to me time and time again. In those moments, it's also helpful to remind them, at the end of the day, it's intimacy that a partner is after. Sex and pleasure certainly an important component of that, but it's not everything. It probably won't sink in the first, or second, or third time. But if you keep saying eventually, if your partner is willing to do the hard emotional work, it will begin to seep in. Relationships make the issue easier to deal with. If there is a history of trust, hopefully, it can soften the fear of being judged or rejected. But even in a hookup, I think the above is still true.
Batronshak says, what advice would you give to young men?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, secrets are toxic. I hid my secret, except in the obvious scenarios when it was impossible to, for so many years, thinking that if someone found out it would be too humiliating to bear. So my advice would be, if there is something eating you inside, find some that you trust, or a professional, and share it with them. Ultimately, vulnerability is not weakness, it is strength. Unburdening the fear of someone finding out is a pathway towards becoming whole, happy, and joyful. AjBoys24 says, hi Jason, fencer for 7 years here. I followed your story for a while and I find it very inspiring. How much do you feel weight is a factor in one's performance in fencing? I weigh about 195, but I'm pretty in shape. I don't tire very easily, and I'm graduating college next week. I fenced at the collegiate club level. I want to lose some weight before nationals this year. How much of an impact do you think losing weight will have on my fencing? I feel like all else constant, I'll be able to move more quickly, but I really don't know how much it will affect my performance overall. Thanks. Chisonra Jasusa replies, a fencing question. Wonderful. And thank you for following for all these years. Okay, so I have a pretty strong point of view on this. The short answer is that weight matters insofar as it affects your agility. For many fencers, losing just a few pounds does help because having less weight for your muscles to accelerate allows for more explosive movement. However, you also have to consider that some bodies actually need to carry a little extra weight to help their muscles optimally. For example, after Beijing I got into the fashion world and put a lot of pressure on myself to look like the other models. OBV, bad idea. So I lost probably 10, maybe 15 pounds. But I found that even though I was lighter, I felt slower. So, it totally depends on your body. But give it a go with the understanding that you might actually be at the perfect competition weight. I suggest doing it during the off-season so you don't find yourself sluggish at an important competition.
Korean Jesus Pleasure says, as a mid-20s guy with mediocre success in getting past performance anxiety in the bedroom, I've regressed quite a bit. I'm now with my lovely partner for over a year now, but the issue comes up every other time we try to be intimate. I tested for hormonal imbalances and whatnot, but that's not the issue. Viagra also only worked sometimes. It's a healthy relationship. She knows I'm trying my best to relax. Any further tips or strategies? Is it just more time trying to relax?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, thanks for the question. One thing that I found helpful was the paradigm shift from putting my foot on the gas to taking my foot off the brakes. I think most men feel this pressure to rush through stuff. That is, rush to get hard, rush to begin having sex, rush to orgasm, and this instinct towards forward motion can create undue pressure to keep things moving. And when the body doesn't respond immediately, it's like, oh shit, I missed this checkpoint back there, and panic ensures and the whole thing spirals out of control. When describing what I felt like when it happened to me, whether that was being unable to get hard or unable to stay hard, I often use the analogy of running on a treadmill that was moving too fast. But when I thought about it more as taking my foot off the brakes, it felt like I could ease in and explore what actually felt good, which was more likely to lead to arousal. Hope that helps.
Just Scott Austin says, how many jokes do you hear about your sword when you talk about this?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, many. My wife and I have a running list of humorously terrible titles for the book. Achilles Steel, Any Takers, Bueller, Crochet and Sensation. Sacy, have a lot of respect for you and the trials you went through to overcome this. If you had to describe sexual performance anxiety to someone confused about their situation, how would you concisely define it? And how did you ultimately overcome it? Chisonra Jasusa replies, thanks for the question. I would define it as the tendency to interpret certain internal, fast heartbeat, tightness in chest, etc., or external cues, your partner's slight roll of the eyes, passivity, etc., as a signal that you are about to fail. This further draws your attention of the cues that matter: sensuality, connection, etc., and takes you completely out of the moment and you fail. I put this in parentheses because failing is the story you tell yourself. It's not actual failure. Doubt the more safe that you feel, through talking to and feeling supported by your partner, and the better you at preventing the spiral from beginning, the less likely you are to misinterpret those cues. Just to add, this is really similar to sports performance. I trained myself to react to specific cues, my opponent's rhythm, body posture and speed. But when unhelpful thoughts or external distractions stole away my attention, that's when my performance plummeted. I did a ton of work, mediation and just dogged practice, in both arenas to keep my attention focused when it was supposed to be, on the present moment.
Journalist Joe says, are you still struggling with the performance anxiety? How have you treated it? What worked best? How, if possible, did you include your wife in this struggle? How can a sexual partner help asking as a wife of a wonderful man who also has the issue?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, thank you for the question and for sharing this. I think performance anxiety never fully goes away, but part of what encouraged me to share my story so publicly is moving past the issue. I've tried so many things, Viagra, meditation, sensual massage, therapy, and many others, but ultimately what helped the most was just talking about completely openly with my partner and learning how to relax into the experience. In my case, I also discovered later in life that I had a slight hormone imbalance, which likely contributed to my early failures. This probably knocked me into the fear and shame cycle that perpetuates the issue, so resolving that was also helpful in closing the loop. But that didn't come until long after I was engaged and in a very good place in terms of my general mindset. Not sure for me says, when you lose a fencing match, do you get punny and say kisses, foiled again? Chisonra Jasusa replies, I mean, what's the point?
John Ward says, trouble getting hard, staying hard or coming too quickly?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, thanks for the question. Mostly A, sometimes B, and very rarely C.
Pantaleimon Seishi Jason, we went to school together. I struggled for many years with similar issues. How come I'm not an Olympic athlete? JK, cool to see you on Reddit.
Chisonra Jasusa replies, how? Thanks brother. Bad at Hearthstone say seem late to the party, but I wanted to let you know that I read your article and I'm proud of you. I'm just a stranger, but your poise, eloquence, and frank exploration of such a painful and personal struggle is commendable. Good luck on the road ahead, friend. Do you think the situation is better for young men now than it was 20 years ago? Is our culture changing for the better? Chisonra Jasusa replies, thank you for those kind words. I'm sorry if it seems like I'm waffling on this answer, but I would say yes and no. On one hand, the internet has allowed young boys to look outside their communities and find role models that are great examples of modern men, instead of the local high school jackass. But on the other, it also allows them to find horrendously bad examples of what they take for modern masculinity. Dudes climbing cranes, bras with fleets of exotic cars, etc. I think we definitely are moving in the right direction as emotional intelligence and empathy have become commonplace words, but it's not without many distractions.
Zoinkscoop84 says, as an Olympian, how do you feel about the assertion that the Olympics cause more harm than good in economic cost and that the athletes don't really benefit?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, I certainly can understand the argument. The Olympics are outrageously expensive, and most cities don't follow through with the urban renewal efforts that are baked into the construction plans. However, having been to 3 of them, 2 as a competitor, 1 as a spectator, I have to say the magic of the games is indescribable. It's one of the few times, the World Cup being another example, that world stops and can sort of generally agree that this thing is pretty cool. For example, I lived in London for 4 years. Virtually no one talks to each on the tube, subway, but during the London Games, the conviviality was so intense that people were chatting about the teams, competitors and results in pretty much every car. The Olympics create connection and rare exciting moments that remind us that, gosh darn it, it's good to be alive.
WODEN Spoon says, hi Jason, I don't exactly suffer from performance anxiety, but even after 15 years of marriage to a beautiful woman out of my league, for sure, I continue to struggle with initiation anxiety. Once I'm warmed up, or if my wife initiates sex, I have no problem pleasuring and or being pleasured. But when it comes to initiating sex, I become self-conscious and hyper-aware of my wife's body-language. I've been to a couple of therapists over the years, partly because of this issue, but I've never gotten past IT.my question: have you suffered from anxiety while initiating sex? If so, or even if not, do you have any wisdom to impart around that?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, thanks for the question. Yes, definitely, but for a slightly different reason. I used to feel a lot of anxiety about initiating because I was never sure that I was going to get aroused. I used to view what could follow as an awkward dance. Do we keep going? Do we stop? Do we talk about it? And so I often didn't want to bear the uncertainty or just didn't have the energy. I'm by no means a pro at this in all honesty. But one thing I'm trying to do more often is to begin cultivating intimacy long before the actual initiation. In other words, if it's just been a regular old day, and we get in bed, and I just flop on top of my wife like hey sex time, that's more likely to make me feel awkward. But when we've cooked dinner together and been very touchy, or dropped funny, sexual innuendos into the conversation early on, sex doesn't feel as much like a big leap. I think that kind of foreplay provides a long slow on-ramp to the actual event.
Roboterator says I fenced you in a NAC a few years ago and it remains one of the highlights of my fencing career. So thanks for that. What's your opinion of the new category of men that pay, like Oil and McDonald? Would you ever do commentary? If you put out a YouTube channel doing bout analysis, I'd watch it.
Chisonra Jasusa replies, wow, thank you. To be honest, I haven't watched the rise of those guys as closely as men's saber and foil, but I'm generally pretty stoked that USA fencing is in a more dominant position than ever. This upcoming games will be the first time that we have medal, and in many cases gold medal, contenders in pretty much every weapon. I'm certainly going to try to go to Tokyo if I can. I'd love to do more commentary. I did it at the Salt Lake City Women's Saber World Cup, and should the opportunity present itself again, I'd be into it.
Panconquisafrito says on the subject on women, what's your experience with them when you can't perform? Have you been open with your woman about it yet? And if so, how did it go?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, thanks for the question. In the past, I was not upfront about it. Most of the time, I just prayed that it wouldn't happen and that one day all my problems would go away. This led to horrendous communication following failed hookups or new relationships. Eventually, I realized, or forced myself to accept, that communication is the key. Now, I'm married. But early on the issue still lingered. I'd made a lot of progress before meeting her, but talking about it with her, and continuing to work with a therapist, helped disarm the whole issue. She was incredibly supportive and has been pivotal in getting me to the healthy place that I am now. But every now and again the issue still arises, pun intended, and we just laugh about it. Quality Hot Mess says, fair warning, I know jack shit about fencing. My question is this: if an opponent had a broadsword, would that be an advantage in competition? Why or why not? Chisonra Jasusa replies, thanks for the question. So, broadswords aren't used in modern fencing, but they are pretty damn cool. However, hypothetically, they wouldn't be all the great. They are extremely heavy, and often require two hands to properly maneuver. So, if I had a saber and my opponent a broadsword, I'd most likely beat them to punch. But, on the flip side, if I got hit with one of those, I'd be toast.
Eltostito 191 Seishi Jason, I haven't struggled as much with not being able to get an erection, but often I find myself having a hard time getting to orgasm when I'm with a partner. Different type of performance, but did mention it with Hollywood Girl in the article. Is this something you continue to struggle with? And if so, what helped?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, thank you for sharing that. That does occasionally happen me, especially if I'm stressed or distracted. Forgive the copy-paste, but I just wrote an answer above that I think is appropriate here. One thing that I found helpful was the paradigm shift from putting my foot on the gas to taking my foot off the brakes. I think most men feel this pressure to rush through stuff. That is, rush to get hard, rush to begin having sex, rush to orgasm. And this instinct towards forward motion can create undue pressure to keep things moving. And when the body doesn't respond immediately, it's like, oh shit, I missed this checkpoint back there and panic ensures and the whole thing spirals out of control. When describing what I felt like when it happened to me, whether that was being unable to get out or unable to stay out, I often use the analogy of running on a treadmill that was moving too fast, but when I thought about it more as taking my foot off the brakes, it felt like I could ease in and explore what actually felt good, which was more likely to lead to arousal.
4SKINPHENOM69 says, what's the best life advice you got that had nothing to do with your success in fencing but actually helped in your journey to the Olympics? Besides winning, what was your favorite thing about fencing?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, I'd say, be curious. At the time when I was competing, top fencing athletes didn't have access to a lot of the resources that many Olympians do today. Sports psychologists, nutritionists, strength and conditioning coaches. So, with that advice in mind, I pretty much took it upon myself to just go out and learn it. This might seem obvious, but even though many of my competitors were super hard working at the fencing stuff, many didn't look outside of their immediate domains for ways to get better. I remember reading books about Zen, trying strange diets, etc., all in service of unlocking some kind of edge in competition. I'd like to think that made a difference. Who knows, and my constant desire to learn kept me a step ahead. I loved the precision of fencing. One of my coaches used to say that a top fencer maneuvers the weapon the way a virtuoso strokes their violin, and when you execute a specific sequence of movements just right, the sensation is really gratifying. I used to spend ungodly amounts of time at the fencing target rehearsing how it felt to move the weapon along a certain path. My second favorite aspect was the tactical element. You are constantly thinking ahead as to what your opponent might do. It's a wonderful blend of combat, reacting only to what's happening in the moment, and strategy. If I do this, then my opponent will do that.
Lucille Batrasesha, have your friends and family reacted since you've gone public with your story?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, extremely positive. I began sharing my story gradually as I began working on the memoir I am writing. But I still feared the reaction that might follow the publishing of the article. I was overwhelmed with texts, notes, comments that were incredibly supportive and uplifting. I'm sure there are a few people who intended to communicate their disapproval through their silence, but that group, if they exist at all, was a drop in the bucket. Nonchalant Supreme says, do you feel like the road to being an Olympian stripped away your teenage year experience? Is Olympic Village as lit as it sounds? Chisonra Jasusa replies, for sure. My high school years felt relatively normal, with the exception of my sexual struggles. I did travel a lot, but it all felt manageable. However, college was when things really got tough. I switched to a new coach that I really wanted to impress, so I started practicing twice as often. I also started going to NCAA competitions and to many more international competitions. I also was really struggling sexually at that time. And so I felt like if I was failing at that, I better be perfect at everything else. So I also studied way too much and basically had no time for anything else. College wasn't all that fun, to put it bluntly. The Olympic Village is definitely pretty crazy. When athletes start finishing competitions and the stress of 4 years falls away, people get a little nutty. The stories you hear about free condoms are true. I never took advantage of this for OBV reasons. But it's still really fun. It's like a revolving door of amazing people. I would trade the experience for anything.
Scallop Oolong says, is it true that Tim Morehouse has the best dog peeing on a fire hydrant move in Sabre?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, how? Yes, his counter-attack at the end of the strip was pretty much unmatched. I've seen him do it thousands of times to great effect. When you fence him, even if you know the counter-attack is coming, it's still really hard to avoid. The combination of his slightly unorthodox timing and strength made it really hard to not get stung. I applaud whatever works.
Black Flag Forever says, why fencing?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, I was introduced to fencing through an elementary school friend, so that part was dumb luck. But it was my first coach, an incredible man from Romania, that made me stick to fencing long enough to start competing and figure out that I had a knack for it. He always made me chuckle even when we were doing drills that I hated. Fencing is really technical, so I gotta say, it was pretty much all his doing.
Bearded fencer says, Jason, I appreciate your blog, your hosting of events and how much you give to the world of fencing. I have so much performance anxiety that I don't enjoy tournaments and I don't try to get in anyone's pants. How do I overcome these fears and step out into the unknown?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, thank you. This is a big question and very important one. The thing I would say is that exposing yourself to what stresses you is the first step. If your anxiety is really high, jumping straight into bed with someone or right into senior knack isn't a great idea. You want to try to experience that stress in small doses. So perhaps take someone on a date, but make it clear that you'd like to take things slow. Or go to practice and just imagine that you are fencing as if you are at a tournament. Little by little it will get easier. But when it's really tough, remember that vulnerability is where all the exciting moments happen. Creativity, intimacy, and many other incredible things come from opening up to the unknown.
Matt's Neat World says, did you take steroids? And if so, was that a factor in your sexual performance?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, never. Fencing is not a sport that you often see drug scandals. Unlike track and field where pure speed or strength is the name of the game, fencing draws more on experience, tactics, and technique. There is no doubt that they could be helpful, but I was never tempted and am strongly against performance-enhancing drugs. But certain hormones, testosterone in particular, are inextricably linked with sex drive and performance, so I would venture that they would have only made things worse.
TPOET says, hey man, were you sexually abused when young? I was by multiple people. I'm okay with it by now. I'm 42 male. But intimacy is tough. I can perform sexually, not an issue for me. But I don't like being touched much. Like hugs and cuddling and such. I get uncomfortable. I've read this is common for people who have been abused. Needs to be discussed. Thanks for your post.
Chisonra Jasusa replies, thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that's never easy to write. I wasn't sexually abused when I was younger, which is why I'd refer to my early sexual failures as trauma with a lowercase t. I can still relate to this feeling, however insignificant it may be compared to what you experienced. I'm pretty sensitive and sometimes I just feel overstimulated and don't want to be touched. My wife and I are pretty good at communicating around that now, so she knows that sometimes, even if the scenario seems to call for hug, I kinda just want to cocoon. I'm really sorry you went through that. I hope you feel you have the right people around you help you move past it. There is no question that we need to talk about this more. The SS Challenger says, Jason Rojas, drop dead gorgeous handy with a sword in the 21st century, literal coverboy of most eligible bachelors. Jason Rojas, worried about his sexual prowess? IAmA, it really can happen to anybody. I'm a woman who cannot achieve orgasm. For me, that's fine. I still have plenty of fun in bed and come out of it feeling perfectly satisfied. But I've always struggled with partners feeling as though they are inadequate. I've struggled with feeling like I'm the one making them feel that way. It's a real barrier in sexual relationships, especially when it, almost inevitably, gets to the point where I feel like I can't communicate what makes me feel good in bed without making him feel worse about himself. And points where I'm no longer focused on enjoying myself and am instead putting on a show to appease his ego. Ironically, a man's performance anxiety is the very thing that ruins his performance, and I really don't know what to do about it, so I guess I have two questions for you, Mr. Rojas. First question, what should someone in my situation do, or not do, to help a partner feel confident? Obviously, basic communication and reassurance is important regardless. But what do I do when that doesn't seem to be enough? Can I do something? Should I do something? Second question, will you go out with me? Chisonra Jasusa replies, blushing, lol, so sorry to hear that you struggle with that. My brain's turning to a plessauce, so forgive me if my thoughts sound trite at this point. Unfortunately, I have no better advice than what you've already mentioned, communication and reassurance. Also, the heat of the moment doesn't always yield opportune moments to discuss. Often being asked what I want in bed, while in bed, leads to a brain freeze. So, as weird as it to discuss sex over granola, I find that it often helps. Question 2, I'm flattered. I'll have to ask my wife, but I'm sure she'd approve.
But Nutley says, what is your favorite dinosaur?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, I have been avoiding your question all night because it's too hard. There are so many to choose from, sorry.
Chtor says, what are your feelings on pineapple as a pizza topping?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, strong yes. You?
HOTSAUCCOMMITTEP3 says, what do you think defines a man, and how does that differ, or is it the same as the traditional American concept of masculinity?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, thanks for the question. Traditionally, American culture has judged masculinity based on physical strength, achievement, material wealth and sexual prowess. But what should be incorporated into how we define masculinity today is his drive towards emotional self-improvement and ability to view vulnerability as a strength instead of a weakness.
J1022 says, so have you overcame your sex performance anxiety? If so, have you had more casual sex? Has your sex life gotten better? How did you overcome this battle?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, thanks for the question. The short answer is yes. It never fully goes away, but it's not something I think about all that often. I describe this in more detail in some of the other threads, but in short, it was ultimately about learning how to better communicate with my partner and learning not to place my focus on the cues that often sent my head spinning. Mostly the disabling thoughts like, oh God, it's happening again. My sex life has most certainly gotten better. In the past, even during the occasional times that it didn't happen, I was still felt stress around sex, which obviously takes a lot of the fun out of it. With the stress largely gone, I can focus on the stuff that's important, having fun, feeling connection, etc. I'm married now, so I don't have casual sex. But my wife and I certainly try to mix things up and continue to look for deeper connection in new experiences. Lemmiwinks 1978 says, has anybody mentioned that you look almost exactly like Nev from Catfish? Chisonra Jasusa replies, my wife is pretty much obsessed with that show, so yes.
The Cake I Sally Zero says, why Saber also, what advice would you give to an aspiring teenage foil fencer?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, thanks for the question. Copy pasting the first bit from above. I actually started in foil and by the end of the first week my eyes were glazing over my lessons. So in addition to my amazing coach, I also think I was drawn to the speed of Saber. Things just happened so fast, which I loved. Granted, foil can be equally fast at times, but I just wasn't shown that in the same way that I was in Saber. My advice to you would be to try spending as much time as possible around other great fencers. If you don't have that at your fencing club, find the nearest club that does and spending as much time there as possible. While having a great coach is incredibly important to becoming a strong competitor, I think the most important aspect is being able to consistently practice with people that are better than you are. That constant pressure to move faster, improve your technique, and think on your feet is what improves your fencing at the speed it needs to be really competitive. Ember 357 says, do you have any cool scars? Chisonra Jasusa replies, does a chickpox scar count? Ugh, I wish.
Pluribustulum says, are you gay?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, hi Pluribustulum. The short answer is no. I did explore my sexuality in my quest to find a solution to my struggles, but ultimately concluded that my issue did not lie in denying my sexual orientation. However, I should point out that I believe sexuality falls on a spectrum, and while I am now married to a woman, I try to avoid strong labels such as these.
Thick to me says, in practice, are there any elements to the sport that you think get severely overlooked and that by working on can make you a better saber fencer?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, thanks for the question. I think one thing a lot of fencers coaches overlook is the importance of rhythm in fencing. By that I mean two things. One, the ability to feel your opponent's rhythm as they move, especially when they are attacking. Being able to maintain distance is not just about footwork technique, but also intuitively predicting how their attack will unfold too. The ability to vary the rhythm of your steps. Having practiced a number of different rhythms allows you to change things up when your opponent catches on. Practice doing the same footwork steps a number of different ways. For example, advance, lunge can be done in many different rhythms. Hope that helps.
Jacqueline says, what if any role did pornography play in your issues?
Chisonra Jasusa replies, thanks for the question. Like most teens, I watched a pretty normal amount of pre-internet porn. But during the years that I was really struggling, I watched a lot more of it. Sometimes it was just to remind myself that I was a sexual being. I certainly didn't feel that way through late teens and early 20s, but I definitely used it as a crutch. It allowed me to get away with not pushing myself to go out and deal with the issue because I could get a little bit of safe gratification by staying home and pulling up a clip. I actually don't watch a whole lot of porn now, although I do think it can be a good jumpstart to arousal when with a partner if both parties are into that. So I'm pro porn that doesn't depict sexual acts that are degrading to women or make men think they need to always perform like Spartans in the bedroom. As long as it's not keeping you from real physical intimacy, then I'm all for it.